Yep, you got it. So we're going to start with the sensing functions. And I think we should follow it with the intuitive functions and then do the judging functions last.
Oh,
does that work?
Okay. Sure.
Then we can just start with perceiving and then move on to judging.
Yeah.
So with the perceiving functions, if they have an analytic style, whether it's intuition or sensing, it doesn't matter. If you're a more analytic intuition or a more analytic sensing function of all four of them, then there's a tendency to be more focused on a central figure rather than everything going on around it. So he likens it to if you're watching a play, being really focused on the main character or whoever's talking on the stage. Whereas if it's a more holistic version, it's more like being focused on everything, including like what's going on off stage around you, right?
Reddit. I think of Reddit. Like you'll show me a meme on Reddit and there's this thing on this GIF that's happening, like the main event, like somebody's riding a bike and they're doing some activity. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And then I'll look at the comments of the thing you showed me and people were mentioning like some obscure detail of like a coffee cup in the background and some poster on the wall or like all these obscure, like, I'm like, how do they even notice that?
Yeah.
Like what is going on there? Like I'm focused on the activity at hand, not all the stuff behind the activity.
Yep.
But other people seem to be more fascinated by that than the main thing on the screen.
Yep.
I've always been baffled by that, but I think that'd be a good example of attunement to more of the entire picture versus what is the action that's happening right in front of me?
Yeah. Like if we have 2 books on our library, people would be like, why do you have 2 copies of that book? And we're like, we do. But that would be a more holistic experience of watching the podcast.
Yep.
The video is like, you're not just watching the person, you're watching all the things around them. That's a more holistic frame. And Analytic would just be focused straight on whoever's talking.
I'm judgmental to those people. I'm like, get focused on the thing we need to be doing. Like, you're getting distracted with all these extra details. It's not specifically picking apart books on the podcast, but anyway, it's like watching a GIF and mentioning all the nuance of it. I'm like, what does that matter? Why you care about that? That doesn't serve your life at all. And I get really judgy. And then I'm like, why am I being judgy about neutral things?
Those dang holistic people. Can't live with them. Can't shoot them. What do we do with them? Yeah, no, fair. And I mean, I think that it goes the other direction too.
I'm sure it does.
I think holistic people can be quite judgy of the analytic people.
I drive them crazy.
That's right. So, I mean, we could do like a whole podcast just on that as a personality type.
Sure.
Analytic versus holistic. But wait, there's more. So now we get to some of the meat of this beyond just this distinction. So again, think of this as having its own traits. We just read off the compare and contrast of all of the traits of an analytic versus a holistic preference.
Yeah.
And you've already mentioned you have a preference for analytic, and I mentioned I have a preference for holistic.
I think I have a compulsion for it, not just a preference for it. I think I'm like obsessed about being it this way. Like this is very much driving me on so many levels as we're reading through this. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's just like, oh yeah, it's sort of my preference. Like I see it very strong. Now, I will say there's part of me that identifies a lot of the holistic stuff too.
Sure.
And depending on which part of me we're talking about, it feels more balanced. Mm-hmm. And we can talk maybe more about that in a little bit. But
yes,
let's jump into the sensing functions if you're ready for that.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, and that actually is a good segue to a piece of information that's important to mention before we get nothing but comments of, can I be both? Yes, you can. In fact, in the subtype podcasts, we mentioned it is whether or not your first 2 functions. So take, for example, me having ENTP preferences. I have extroverted intuition or exploration as my first or driver function. And I have introverted thinking or accuracy as my auxiliary or co-pilot function. And if you prefer both of them to be analytic, that creates a dominant subtype. If you prefer both of them to be holistic, that creates a harmonizing subtype. And then depending upon the function and the configuration, there's also a creative or a normalizing subtype. We go way into it in all of those podcasts, so please go check it out. But that indicates...
There's a podcast specifically for your personality type. So go look up the specific one for your type. I think you're going to resonate deeply with it.
You got it. And so there are many people who are both, right? The other thing that I think is important to mention, and this is that segue, is when the higher up a function is for you, so the closer it is to your first function, so let's say the first function, right, the driver function, you're very likely to be able to play both sides, right? You have access to the analytic and the holistic version. And Dario even mentions, and I have seen this play out in coaching, If you can't go between them, that creates a form of one-sidedness, and that's worrying. So one of the challenges I have is, and we'll talk about it in in a future podcast, the next one, my extroverted intuition is very holistic, and I really struggle to get into the analytic version of it. And I know that creates one-sidedness in me. I know it's a challenge. So that's the other thing, is that if you're going like, can I be both? The answer is yes, you should be both, right? Particularly for your first function.
That's the goal.
And if possible, your second one too.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's a goal. So yes, you can before you ask.
Yeah.
Okay, now we can get into the sensing functions.
Which gives us tons of opportunity for personal growth
Mm-hmm.
using just our personality type alone.
Yes.
Because there's so much to grow our functions themselves, but also grow different expressions of those functions inside of our personality. It's a lifetime of work. We'd never run out of things to do
Mm-hmm.
to work on ourselves in that.
You got it. You got it.